She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just sat on that bench outside Buckingham Palace and broke. No one knew her name. No one asked. Tourists kept their distance, unsure what to do with a woman silently falling apart in public. Except for one man, the royal guard who wasn't supposed to notice, who wasn't supposed to move, but something in his stance changed. Barely, quietly, like a shift in the wind no one sees, but everyone feels. What happened next didn't trend online, but it left a silence louder than applause. Before we show you how a royal guard broke his vow of stillness to do something unforgettable, hit that subscribe button and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Lily Rhodes was 29 years old and already tired in places most people never notice. As a social worker, she'd spent years listening to stories that didn't have happy endings. Abused children, fractured families, elderly clients forgotten by everyone but the system. And she carried every one of those stories inside her like quiet weights. But nothing had prepared her for the call that came 3 weeks ago. Her mother, her anchor, was gone. No goodbye, no warning. A simple voicemail from the hospital and then silence. When Lily asked for a few days off, her supervisor, sympathetic but firm, reminded her they were short-staffed. "The kids need you," she'd said. Lily nodded, then kept going. One home visit at a time. One tear held back after another. Until this morning, she hadn't planned to cry in public. She'd just walked. No destination, no map. Her feet led her through winding London streets until she found herself outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. Something about the order of it, the guards, the structure, the unwavering calm, felt like the opposite of what her life had become. So she sat, and she broke. Not loudly, not to make a scene. Just enough to let something fall out of her chest before it hardened completely. What she didn't know was that one of those guards, Sergeant Adam Renner, standing tall behind mirrored sunglasses, was watching her. Not obviously, not in defiance of protocol, but with the kind of stillness that comes from understanding. Adam had stood in that same storm once, years ago, when his sister Claire lost her own quiet war with depression. No one saw it coming. No one except Adam. And by the time he did, it was too late. Since then, he had never missed signs like the ones he saw on Lily's face. Grief recognizes grief. And stillness, he knew, wasn't always strength. Sometimes it was survival. Lily wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, gave a small, shaky breath, and stood to leave. She hadn't come to make a scene. In fact, the moment she felt her grief spill into public view, she wanted nothing more than to vanish. She pulled her coat tighter, cast one last glance toward the palace gates, and turned to go, never noticing the tiny folded paper that slipped from her pocket and landed silently on the stone path behind her. The tourists resumed their noise, their photos, their laughter, but one man didn't move. Sergeant Adam Renner remained in position, the image of composure in his ceremonial red tunic and bearskin cap. To most eyes, he was still as ever. But something in his bearing had shifted. His shoulders more squared than usual, his stance a touch more alert. His breathing, slow and deliberate, no longer followed the strict mechanical rhythm he had mastered over 12 years of service. Behind his dark lenses, his eyes followed her every step. A little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the guard. "Mom, is he watching that lady?" She hushed him, uncertain. Another tourist whispered, "I think that one's reacting. Look, he's different." But no one knew how much Adam had seen. He'd counted the minutes she sat, exactly 18. He'd watched how often she checked her phone without unlocking it. He noticed how her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking, and how she pressed her thumb over her coat buttons like it gave her something to hold on to. Most of all, he'd noticed how carefully she had tried not to fall apart in a world that was too loud, too fast, and too indifferent. As she crossed the far edge of the courtyard, Adam let his eyes shift slightly. The folded paper still lay there, half hidden by the morning wind, fragile and forgotten. No one else saw it, but Adam did, just like he'd seen her. And though his boots didn't move, though his hands remained perfectly still at his sides, something in the air had already changed. He would remember her, and when his duty ended, he knew what he had to do. Hours later, when the crowds had thinned and the sun dipped lower across the palace courtyard, Adam Renner stepped out of uniform. No cameras followed him. No announcements were made. But as soon as his duty ended, he walked, deliberately, silently, back toward the bench where the woman had sat. The world had moved on. The tourists were gone. The stone was cold. But the small folded item remained, lodged near the leg of the bench where the wind had trapped it. Adam bent down, not like a soldier retrieving orders, but like a man lifting something delicate. It wasn't a wallet or a note. It was a photo, a candid image, slightly worn, corners curled, with Lily smiling beside an older woman, her mother. Their faces were pressed close together, foreheads nearly touching, joy unfiltered. On the back, in fading ink, were the words, "Thank you for always telling me I mattered." That one sentence hit Adam harder than it should have. He read it once, then again. It was personal, too personal to leave behind for cleaners or careless hands. This wasn't lost property. It was a piece of someone's grief, and maybe, if handled gently, a piece of someone's healing too. He looked around, no one watching, no one even aware. It was a gesture no one would witness, and he preferred it that way. He slipped the photo into a protective inner pocket, careful not to crease it. Before leaving, he scanned the area again, and that's when he noticed a small card tucked between the bench slats, partially damp, nearly illegible. But on it, faintly scribbled in the corner, was the name of a community resource center on Holloway Road, the same one he'd heard about from a fellow officer, a place for social outreach, trauma support, and youth care. He stood for a moment, card in one hand, photo secure in the other, processing the trail she had unknowingly left behind. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew enough. And if fate had drawn her to his post, then maybe it was now his turn to stand quietly for someone who never asked for help, but needed to feel seen all the same. Lily returned the next morning, not quite sure why. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was hope. But as she neared the same bench outside Buckingham Palace, her eyes scanned the ground, the corners, the small cracks in the stone, searching. The photo was gone. Her breath caught in her throat, the sinking weight of loss returning like a whisper, careless, sharp, final. She sat down briefly, trying to convince herself it didn't matter. It was just a photo, just an object. But she knew better. That photo was one of the last good memories she had of her mother. It wasn't just something she lost. It was something she had left behind when she was too broken to notice. After a few minutes, she stood again and walked away, slower than before, the quiet heavier now. She made it through the door of her office without a word, sank into her desk, and let her fingers trace the edge of her coat pocket again. Empty. Just before lunch, a knock tapped gently on her office door. Her co-worker peeked in, holding a white envelope. "This just arrived for you. No return address." Lily took it slowly, unsure. It was sealed with clean precision, and in the corner, small, embossed, and unmistakable, was a silver palace emblem. No handwriting, no postage, just presence. Inside, her breath hitched. The photo, cleaned, flattened, protected now in a clear plastic sleeve, as if someone had taken care not just to return it, but to preserve it. There was no message, no explanation. But to Lily, the silence said more than words ever could. Her co-worker hovered near the doorway, watching her expression shift. "Is that from the guard?" she asked, half curious, half incredulous. Lily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed on the photo, her thumb gently running across the plastic, and her lips parted just slightly, not in a smile, but in something softer, something closer to peace. Long before Sergeant Adam Renner stood guard outside Royal Gates, he had already learned what it meant to stay still through pain. He was just 19 when his sister, Claire, vanished into the night. She had been the bright one, full of joy, endlessly kind, always more worried about others than herself. But beneath the warmth, there had been shadows she rarely named. Adam was close, but not close enough to see it coming. One autumn evening, Claire simply walked into the Thames and never came back. They found her coat folded neatly by the edge. No note, no noise. Just silence. Final, hollow, cruel. The news came during Adam's 3rd week of ceremonial training. He'd been in uniform when the call came. And he hadn't flinched, not once. His commanding officer even praised his iron focus. But inside, everything had collapsed. That day, he had stood still not out of strength, but because he didn't know what else to do. Grief turned into discipline. Stillness became survival. And over time, he began to believe that silence itself had power. It could hold things together. It could keep the world from unraveling. And sometimes, it could give others something to lean on. But there was a darker side to that stillness, too. One he carried like a quiet scar. He had never reached out to Claire when it might have mattered. Never asked the question. Never broken his own silence. That failure stayed with him, quietly informing every ceremony, every patrol, every long hour where he stood unblinking while the world passed by. So when he saw Lily Rhodes sitting alone on that bench, trying not to fall apart, something unspoken flickered inside him. Not pity, not duty, recognition. Her tears weren't a disruption to protocol. They were a warning, a reminder that sometimes people break quietly before they disappear completely. And if silence could protect, then it also had the power to respond. Even if it was just a glance, a gesture, a returned photo, a presence that said, "I see you." Adam hadn't needed her name to understand her pain. He had once stood on the same edge, grief wrapped in silence. And that's why her moment by the gate had mattered more than anyone else knew. A week passed before Lily returned to the gates of Buckingham Palace, not out of desperation this time, but out of quiet resolve. She didn't come to cry. She didn't come to be noticed. She simply came to stand in the same place where her breakdown had met unexpected stillness. The morning crowd buzzed around her. Tourists snapping photos, guards at attention, city traffic moving as usual. But Lily wasn't there for the spectacle. She stood just beyond the fence, coat buttoned, eyes soft. Not broken, not entirely whole, just present. Across the courtyard, Adam Renner stood as he always did, still composed, unreadable. His posture hadn't changed. His face remained the same mask of discipline he wore every day, but when Lily arrived, something subtle happened. His gaze, though fixed forward, held an invisible weight. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. But he noticed her, Again. Lily didn't try to wave. She didn't speak. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out a single white flower, modest, delicate, unwrapped, and a small card tucked gently beneath it. She walked to the edge of the gate, knelt, and placed it where the iron met the ground. Then she stood up, gave one short, respectful nod, and walked away without looking back. The card said only one line: "Thank you for not turning away." That evening, deep in the barracks, a staff courier entered Adam's locker room and held out a carefully wrapped object. "This was left at your post," the attendant said plainly, handing it over. Adam took it without comment. Once alone, he unwrapped the tissue and found the white flower, still fresh. The card was still there, too. Simple handwriting, nothing elaborate. He stood for a long time, staring at it in his hand. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just placed it carefully, intentionally, inside a drawer at the back of his locker, not as a trophy, not as a souvenir, but as something else, a reminder that silence, when chosen with purpose, can speak, and being seen doesn't always require words. He closed the drawer, straightened his locker, and went back to work. But something had shifted. Not in uniform, not in formality, in meaning. Weeks later, under a muted London sky, Adam stood stationed at a charity event, an assignment less formal than the rigid precision of palace gates, but still bound by quiet presence. The venue was a restored heritage hall, its garden blooming with spring and softened by the murmurs of donors, dignitaries, and guests. Among them, Lily moved through the crowd with a kind of grace that wasn't loud but earned. Her posture was different now, not fragile, but grounded, not erased by pain, but shaped by it. She didn't expect to see him there, and at first she didn't realize she had. Not until she caught the familiar outline by the gate, rigid, composed, unmistakable. Her steps slowed. Their eyes met across a pathway, just briefly, and for a moment protocol loosened. So did time. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach. But then Adam moved, just slightly, enough to signal it was okay. They met near a garden arch, half sheltered from view. No salute, no stiff formality, just presence. Just them. "I'm glad you came back," Adam said, voice low and even. Lily blinked at the words, simple, but unexpectedly meaningful. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she replied softly. "I did," he said, looking straight at her. "Some things don't need noise to matter." Her eyes glistened, but this time she didn't look away. "That day, I thought I was invisible." Adam shook his head once. "You were never invisible." The moment lingered, not as romance, not as ceremony, but as quiet recognition between two people who had seen each other clearly in a world built to look past. Then, with the unspoken understanding that this wasn't the place for more, they parted. No goodbye, no contact exchanged. Just a pause that meant more than most conversations ever would. From that day forward, Lily returned to the palace gates now and then. Not out of sorrow, not to revisit a wound, but to honor a moment that had changed something within her. She never cried again when she came. She didn't bring flowers or notes. She didn't wave. She simply stood quietly, a few paces from the railing, eyes steady, expression calm. Adam never acknowledged her presence, not with a glance, not with a movement. But inside he always noticed. The stillness between them wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It had become a kind of language neither of them needed to translate. He stood in perfect formation, the way he always had, but when she arrived, something shifted in the air. Something unseen, something deeply known. The tourists never noticed. Cameras clicked. Children waved. Couples posed. But in the quiet rhythm of the crowd, A woman stood and a guard held his post, and neither moved because neither needed to. They had already spoken once, and now they carried that moment forward without needing to repeat it. Stillness had become their agreement. A silent echo of mutual recognition that didn't ask for applause. To the world, it looked like nothing. But to two people who had once crossed paths at the edge of a breakdown, it was everything. Every day, the palace gates draw hundreds of tourists. They pose for pictures, wave at the guards, laugh when there's no reaction. It's all part of the spectacle. But once in a while, one person in the crowd doesn't lift a phone, doesn't wave, doesn't even smile. She just stands quietly, hands clasped in front of her, eyes soft and steady. That's how Lily shows up now, not looking for attention, but honoring a connection that was never loud to begin with. Adam still doesn't move, still holds his post like he always has. But beneath the surface of that posture, he remembers. Not because she made noise, but because she didn't. She broke in silence. And in that silence, he saw her. Not just as another face in the crowd, but as someone trying to hold it together in a world too busy to notice. He never made a scene, never crossed a line. But in one small gesture, he offered something far more lasting than words. Recognition. Some people need to be heard, others simply seen. And once in a while, being seen in silence is the loudest kind of comfort. Have you ever needed someone to notice you, without saying a single word? Would you have spoken up, or stood still like Adam did? Let us know in the comments. Share this story with someone who understands that stillness can carry more love, more dignity, more truth than 1,000 noisy gestures ever could. And we'll see you tomorrow with another Royal Guard story that speaks without a sound.